There is a quiet shift happening right now that almost no one wants to talk about honestly. And that silence is exactly why this conversation matters. Something fundamental has changed in how men view relationships, commitment, and their place in society, and it did not happen overnight. It happened slowly through years of pressure, contradiction, and repeated lessons learned the hard way. By the end of this video, you will understand why so many men are choosing to step back, disengage, and rebuild their lives on their own terms, and why this decision is not rooted in anger, but in clarity. Before we get into it, if you find value in these conversations and you want to support the channel, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell, and select all so you never miss an Angry Guy upload and you get every video the moment it goes live. Also, check out Angry's Crypto Academy linked in the description, where you can learn how to protect and safeguard your assets and grow your wealth by learning how to buy, sell, and trade crypto responsibly. The Academy is linked below, so go check it out now. And if you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show support, you can always buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. Every bit of support helps keep these conversations going. What we are witnessing today is not rebellion and it is not bitterness. It is withdrawal. Men are not protesting. They are not marching. They are not demanding changes. They are simply opting out. They are stepping away quietly and deliberately after recognizing patterns that no longer serve them. For decades, men were told that effort, sacrifice, and perseverance would lead to stable relationships, mutual respect, and long term fulfillment. Many followed that advice faithfully. They invested time, energy, emotion, and resources into building connections, families, and futures. Over time, however, a growing number of men began to notice that the promised outcomes were not materializing and that the rules seemed to change depending on who was being held accountable. Men listened when they were told to be better partners, better listeners, more supportive, more emotionally available. They adapted. They listened again when they were told that traditional masculinity was outdated, that ambition was problematic, that confidence needed to be softened, and that leadership should be restrained. Many men adjusted their behavior repeatedly, believing that compromise was the path forward. What they found instead was that the goalposts continued to move and that no amount of adjustment guaranteed stability, appreciation, or peace. At the same time, men observed a cultural narrative that increasingly framed them as unnecessary or replaceable, while still expecting their participation, resources, and protection. They heard messages suggesting that their presence was optional, but their contributions were mandatory. They saw social spaces where men were discouraged from speaking openly, expressing frustration, or even asking questions without being dismissed. Over time, the lesson became clear. Participation carried high risk and low reward, while disengagement offered peace. This realization did not come from online forums or isolated experiences. It came from repeated real world outcomes. Men saw friends go through difficult separations where effort and loyalty were not factors in the final result. They watched coworkers lose stability overnight due to decisions they had no control over. They listened to conversations where accountability flowed in only one direction. And eventually, many men reached the same conclusion independently. If the cost of participation outweighs the benefit, the rational response is to step back. Walking away does not mean hostility. It does not mean resentment. It means choosing self preservation. Men began focusing on their own routines, their own health, their own financial stability, and their own sense of purpose. They discovered that peace does not require constant validation from others. They learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. Solitude, when chosen intentionally, can be restorative. It can be quiet. It can be grounding. And for many men, it became preferable to constant tension and uncertainty. Another factor that accelerated the shift was the contradiction between stated expectations and observable behavior. Men were told that equality meant shared responsibility, but they often experienced one sided obligation. They were told that partnership meant teamwork, but they frequently carried the majority of risk. They were told that vulnerability would be met with understanding, yet many learned that openness could later be used against them. Over time, pattern recognition replaced idealism. Men also noticed how public shaming became normalized. Private disagreements became public content. Personal moments were shared online for validation or entertainment. The idea that every interaction could be recorded, posted, and judged by strangers introduced a new level of risk to everyday life. Men became more cautious, more reserved, and less willing to engage in situations where misunderstanding could spiral into reputational damage. The safest option increasingly became disengagement. Dating itself transformed into a transactional experience for many men. Expectations rose while incentives declined. The effort required to participate increased, while the potential for genuine connection felt increasingly uncertain. Men found themselves navigating environments where they were expected to invest heavily upfront with no assurance of reciprocity. Over time, many simply decided that the return on investment did not justify the cost. As men stepped back, something unexpected happened. Life became simpler, expenses dropped, stress levels lowered. Time once spent navigating uncertainty was redirected toward personal interests, skill building, fitness, travel, or quiet enjoyment. And men realized they could design lives that aligned with their values rather than constantly negotiating them. Minimalism became less of a trend and more of a natural outcome. When you remove what drains you, what remains becomes clear. This shift also revealed something deeper. Men had been conditioned to define success through external approval. When that approval became unreliable or conditional, they learned to redefine success internally. Progress was no longer measured by relationship status or social validation, but by stability, autonomy, and peace of mind. Men began to trust their own judgment again. At the same time, societal pressures continued to escalate. Economic instability increased. Cost of living rose. Expectations did not adjust accordingly. Men who once carried the burden of providing realized that doing so alone in an uncertain environment was no longer viable or wise. Rather than burning out, they chose restraint. Rather than overextending, they chose conservation. This was not collapse, it was adaptation. There is also an important distinction to make here. Walking away does not mean rejecting relationships entirely. It means refusing to participate in systems that feel unbalanced or adversarial. Men are not against connection. They are against confusion. They are not against commitment. They are against risk without reward. They are not withdrawing from society. They are recalibrating their involvement. As this recalibration continues, we see men building quieter lives that prioritize stability over spectacle. They are less visible, but more grounded. They are less reactive, but more deliberate. They are choosing routines that support long term well being rather than chasing external approval. This is why the movement is difficult to address directly. There is no central organization, there is no manifesto. There is simply a growing number of individuals making the same decision independently. This independence is what makes the shift irreversible. When enough people reach the same conclusion on their own, there is no lever to pull to reverse it. You cannot shame people back into systems they no longer trust. You cannot pressure them into environments they find draining. And you cannot guilt them into sacrificing peace once they have experienced it. The conversation often focuses on what women want or expect, but the more relevant question now is what men are willing to tolerate. That tolerance threshold has changed. Men are no longer motivated by narratives that do not align with their lived experience. They are no longer persuaded by promises without accountability. They are no longer willing to absorb all the risk while being told that their concerns are invalid. This is why appeals for men to re engage are increasingly ineffective. The old incentives no longer work. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Once a man has experienced a stable, self directed life, it becomes very difficult to convince him to return to constant uncertainty. Peace is addictive, clarity is powerful, and autonomy, once reclaimed, is not easily surrendered. Men are not disappearing, they are redirecting, they are investing in themselves, they are focusing on health, finances, and personal fulfillment. They are learning skills, they are building quiet routines, they are protecting their energy, and in doing so, they are demonstrating that fulfillment does not require chaos. This shift also exposes a broader truth about society. Stability requires balance. When one group is consistently told they are replaceable while being expected to carry responsibility, disengagement becomes inevitable. Systems that rely on guilt rather than mutual benefit eventually fail. What we are seeing now is not rebellion, but the natural outcome of prolonged imbalance. As economic pressures increase, and social expectations collide with reality, men are choosing certainty over chaos. They are choosing predictability over volatility. They are choosing self respect over validation. This is not a phase, it is a correction. If there is one lesson to take from this moment, it is that people will always choose environments where effort is respected and outcomes are fair. When that respect disappears, so does participation. Men walking away are not making a statement, they are making a choice. And once that choice brings peace, it becomes permanent. Like as we move forward, the question is not whether men will return to the old dynamics. The question is whether society will adapt to a new reality where participation must be earned rather than assumed. Men have learned to trust observable outcomes over promises. They have learned to listen, to experience over rhetoric, and they have learned that walking away is sometimes the most rational decision available. When men first begin to step away, many do not even realize what they are doing. It does not start with a declaration or a plan. It starts with fatigue, a subtle exhaustion that creeps in after years of effort that never seems to produce lasting stability. Men notice they are always adjusting, always explaining, always proving, while the expectations placed on them never truly ease. Over time, that exhaustion hardens into awareness. They begin to see that the struggle is not temporary and that it is not caused by personal failure, but by a system that rewards sacrifice without reciprocity. For many men, the realization arrives quietly during ordinary moments, a conversation where their concerns are dismissed, a disagreement where accountability flows in only one direction. An observation of how easily years of effort can be minimized or erased. These moments accumulate, they form patterns, and men by nature are pattern oriented. Once a pattern becomes clear, ignoring it becomes impossible. At that point, disengagement stops feeling like avoidance and starts feeling like wisdom. This is where the narrative often becomes distorted. Critics claim that men walking away are running from responsibility. In reality, many men spent years carrying responsibility that was never equally shared. They provided stability, structure, and support while being told that their contributions were either expected or insufficient. When responsibility is framed as obligation rather than partnership, it loses meaning. Men did not abandon responsibility, they abandon imbalance. And another misconception is that men are withdrawing because they fear competition or challenge. This could not be further from the truth. Men thrive on challenge when the rules are clear and the outcome is fair. What they reject is unpredictability disguised as virtue. They reject environments where effort does not correlate with outcome. In every other area of life, men are encouraged to assess risk and reward rationally. Relationships were the one domain where they were expected to suspend that logic. Eventually, logic returned. Men also observed how language itself began to change. Words like accountability, equality, and empowerment were used selectively. Equality often meant equal authority without equal responsibility. Accountability often meant consequences for one side only. Empowerment increasingly translated into exemption from criticism. Men noticed the shift not because they were looking for it, but because it affected them directly. Language stopped reflecting reality, and men chose reality. As men stepped back, many discovered something surprising. The anxiety they had normalized began to fade. The constant second guessing diminished. They slept better. They focused more clearly. They rediscovered interests that had been sidelined. For the first time in years, their time felt like their own. This was not isolation, it was relief. Once experienced, that relief became non negotiable. Financial clarity also played a major role. Men realized how much of their stress was tied to expectations around spending, providing, and performing. When they simplified their lives, their financial pressure dropped dramatically. Fewer obligations meant fewer risks. Fewer risks meant greater stability. Men who once felt trapped by endless expectations found freedom in intentional restraint. Saving, investing, and planning for themselves felt empowering rather than selfish. This financial independence reinforced emotional independence. Men learned that self worth does not need external validation. They learned that peace does not require approval. They learned that a quiet evening, a controlled routine, and personal progress could be more fulfilling than constant pursuit. Society often frames fulfillment as something granted by others. Men discovered that fulfillment can be built internally. Another factor that cannot be ignored is how conflict resolution changed. In healthy systems, disagreement leads to dialogue. In many modern dynamics, disagreement leads to escalation. Men learned that expressing concerns could be interpreted as hostility. Silence was safer than honesty. Over time, men chose neither. They chose absence. You cannot argue with someone who is no longer present, and you cannot escalate a conflict that no longer exists. Men also noticed how risk became asymmetrical. A misunderstanding could carry disproportionate consequences. A misinterpreted moment could lead to social or professional damage. In such an environment, caution becomes rational. When participation carries high downside and limited upside, disengagement is logical. Men did not become fearful, they became selective. This selectivity extended beyond relationships into social spaces more broadly. Men became more discerning about where they spent their energy. They reduced unnecessary interactions. They limited exposure to environments that felt adversarial. They prioritized peace over presence. This was not withdrawal from society, but a redefinition of participation. As this trend continued, men began forming quieter networks, smaller circles built on trust rather than performance, fewer connections, but stronger ones. Conversations became more direct, expectations became clearer. Men valued reliability over excitement, they valued consistency over novelty. This shift reflected maturity rather than defeat. The concept of masculinity also evolved in this process. Rather than chasing external definitions, men reclaimed a personal version of strength. Strength became the ability to say no. Discipline became the ability to walk away. Confidence became the ability to stand alone without resentment. Masculinity was no longer something to prove, it was something to embody quietly. One of the most overlooked aspects of this movement is that men did not stop caring. They stopped overextending. They stopped sacrificing themselves for systems that did not value them. Care without boundaries leads to depletion. Men learn this lesson collectively through experience. Once learned, it could not be unlearned. This is why attempts to shame men back into participation fail. Shame relies on shared values. When values diverge, shame loses power. Men who have rebuilt their lives around peace are no longer motivated by external pressure. They have already experienced the alternative and found it lacking. There is also a generational component to this shift. Younger men are observing older men's experiences and adjusting earlier. They are not waiting decades to reach the same conclusions. They are choosing restraint sooner. This does not mean they lack ambition or desire. It means they are prioritizing sustainability. They are learning from observation rather than repetition. And technology has amplified this awareness. Men can see patterns play out across thousands of stories, not just their own. While individual experiences vary, the themes repeat. When patterns repeat at scale, they stop being anomalies. They become data. Men are trusting data over narratives. This trust in observable reality is what defines the movement. Men are no longer persuaded by how things should be. They are responding to how things are. This shift toward realism is irreversible. You cannot convince someone to ignore their own experiences indefinitely. As men continue to walk away, the social landscape changes. Systems built on assumed participation face friction. Expectations must be renegotiated. This discomfort is not caused by men leaving, it is revealed by their absence. When a system requires one side to stay regardless of outcome, its instability is already present. Men did not create this instability, they exposed it. By stepping back, they revealed which structures were sustainable and which were dependent on silent sacrifice. This exposure is uncomfortable, but necessary. Another important point is that men walking away are not seeking validation for their choice. They are not asking permission. They are not demanding agreement. They are simply living differently. This quiet confidence is what unsettles critics the most. There is nothing to argue against when someone chooses peace and moves on. Over time, men also develop a different relationship with time itself. Without constant external demands, time becomes abundant. Mornings become calmer, evenings become intentional, rest becomes productive rather than guilt ridden. Men realize that productivity is not measured by exhaustion. This slower pace allows reflection. Men think more deeply about what they want long term. They plan with clarity. They invest in skills that compound. They build futures that do not rely on fragile assumptions. Independence becomes the foundation rather than the fallback. As this independence grows, so does resilience. Men become less reactive to external pressure. They are less swayed by trends or approval. Their identity stabilizes. When identity is stable, manipulation loses effectiveness. This is another reason why reversal is unlikely. Some will argue that this path leads to isolation or stagnation. The reality is the opposite. Men who choose intentional solitude often become more grounded, more focused, and more capable. They are not hiding from life. They are engaging with it on their own terms. The broader implication of this movement is not about conflict between men and women. It is about autonomy. When autonomy is reclaimed, participation becomes optional rather than assumed. Optional participation requires mutual benefit. This is the direction things are moving. Men walking away are not waiting for permission to return. They are waiting to see if systems can become balanced. Until then, they will continue building lives that do not depend on imbalance. This is not defiance, it is alignment. As economic, social, and cultural pressures continue to evolve, the men who chose early restraint will be better positioned. They will have lower overhead, stronger foundations, and clearer priorities. They will not be scrambling to adjust. They already adapted. The question society must confront is simple. If participation is voluntary, what makes it worthwhile? Men have answered that question for themselves. They chose peace, clarity, and autonomy. And once those are secured, they are rarely surrendered. As more men continue down this path, something else becomes clear that is rarely discussed openly. Walking away is not an act of despair, it is an act of recalibration. Men are not disengaging because they have given up on life or connection. They are disengaging because they have decided to invest their finite time and energy where it produces stability rather than stress. This distinction matters because it reframes the entire conversation. When men withdraw from situations that consistently drain them, they are not rejecting society, they are choosing sustainability. One of the reasons this shift feels so dramatic is because men historically acted as shock absorbers for social dysfunction. When systems became inefficient, unfair, or chaotic, men absorbed the pressure silently. They worked longer hours, carried more responsibility, and suppressed dissatisfaction in order to keep things moving. For generations, this behavior was normalized and even praised. What has changed is that the return on that sacrifice has diminished to the point where silence no longer feels honorable and endurance no longer feels meaningful. Men began asking a simple internal question: what exactly am I building and who benefits from it? When the answer became unclear or one sided, motivation collapsed. You cannot expect sustained effort without shared ownership. Men are builders by nature, but builders need blueprints that lead somewhere. When every structure they helped create could be dismantled without their consent, the incentive to build disappeared. Another critical element of the shift is the erosion of trust. Trust is not built through words or slogans, it is built through consistency. Men observed a widening gap between what was said and what was done. They heard calls for partnership while experiencing unilateral decision making. They heard language about fairness while witnessing outcomes that suggested otherwise. Over time, trust was not broken by one event, but by repetition. Once trust erodes, withdrawal becomes inevitable. Men also recognized how emotional labor was framed. They were encouraged to be emotionally open, to communicate, to be vulnerable. Yet they often found that vulnerability was treated as a liability rather than a bridge. Personal struggles became leverage. Past admissions resurfaced during conflicts. This taught men a powerful lesson: silence was safer than openness. Eventually, distance became safer than silence. As men stepped back emotionally, they also stepped back psychologically. They stopped internalizing narratives that cast them as perpetual problems. They stopped apologizing for existing. They stopped carrying guilt for circumstances beyond their control. This mental shift alone was liberating. Once men stopped viewing themselves through an external lens, their sense of self stabilized. This stabilization is why men walking away often appear calmer, less reactive, and more focused. They are no longer constantly adjusting their behavior to avoid conflict or misunderstanding. They are no longer navigating emotional minefields. Their decisions become simpler because the variables are reduced. Less noise leads to clearer thinking. Another overlooked aspect is how expectations around availability changed. Men were expected to be constantly available emotionally, financially, and physically, while receiving no guarantee of reciprocity. Availability without boundaries leads to burnout. Men learn to establish limits not through confrontation, but through absence. When you are no longer present, expectations naturally adjust. This adjustment revealed how much of men's labor was taken for granted. Once removed, its absence became noticeable. Yet instead of recognition, men were often met with blame. This response only reinforced their decision. When absence is punished rather than understood, return becomes unlikely. Men also became more intentional about how they define companionship. Rather than seeking validation, they seek alignment. Rather than chasing excitement, they value peace. Rather than prioritizing intensity, they prefer consistency. These preferences are not deficiencies, they are adaptations shaped by experience. This adaptation extends to how men view success. Success becomes less about accumulation and more about control. Control over time, control over environment, control over obligations. Men realize that freedom is not found in excess, but in simplicity. The fewer external pressures you carry, the more resilient you become. As men simplified their lives, they also reclaimed their physical well being. Regular routines replaced chaotic schedules. Exercise became consistent rather than sporadic. Sleep improved. Stress decreased. These changes reinforced the benefits of withdrawal. When your health improves after stepping back, it validates the choice. Men also reconnected with purpose outside of validation. Hobbies returned, skills developed, curiosity resurfaced. Men rediscovered enjoyment in mastery for its own sake. This sense of progress was tangible and rewarding. Unlike social approval, it did not fluctuate unpredictably. Another factor driving permanence is that men began to see disengagement as proactive rather than defensive. They were not avoiding something bad, they were choosing something better. This mindset shift is crucial. When withdrawal is framed as empowerment, it no longer feels temporary. Men also observed how attempts to shame or pressure them back into participation often lacked empathy. Instead of asking why men were leaving, critics demanded that they return. This demand further highlighted the lack of mutual consideration. If men's absence is only addressed when it becomes inconvenient, trust cannot be rebuilt. The idea that men owe participation is central to the tension. Obligation without benefit breeds resentment. Men recognized this and chose neutrality over resentment. Walking away allowed them to remain emotionally neutral rather than embittered. This neutrality is often mistaken for apathy, but it is actually self regulation. As more men adopt this approach, the collective effect becomes visible. Social spaces feel different, expectations shift. The dynamics that relied on silent compliance weaken. This is not collapse, it is transformation. Systems either adapt or they lose participants. Men walking away are not trying to change the world, they are changing themselves. This inward focus is why the movement spreads quietly. It does not require persuasion, it requires observation. When men see others living calmly and independently, curiosity follows. Curiosity leads to experimentation. Experimentation leads to adoption. There is also a long term strategic aspect to this shift. Men are thinking in decades rather than moments. They are planning for stability in an uncertain world. They are minimizing liabilities. They are preserving optionality. These are rational responses to volatility. As uncertainty increases globally, those with fewer obligations will be more adaptable. Men who simplified early will have an advantage. They will be able to pivot without collapse. They will be less vulnerable to external shocks. This foresight reinforces the decision to disengage. The narrative that men are abandoning society overlooks the reality that they are still contributing, just selectively. They work, they build, they create, they simply choose environments where contribution is respected. This selectivity is not selfish, it is efficient. Another misconception is that men walking away are closed off to future connection. In reality, they are open to connection that meets clear criteria: alignment, respect, predictability, shared responsibility. These are not unreasonable standards, they are foundational. Men are not rejecting women as individuals, they are rejecting dynamics that feel adversarial. This distinction matters, but it is often ignored because it complicates the narrative. Simpler stories are easier to promote than nuanced truths. The longer men remain disengaged, the less incentive they have to re enter chaotic environments. Habits solidify, routines stabilize, peace becomes normal. At that point, returning to instability would require a compelling reason. Nostalgia is not enough. This is why calls for men to re engage often fall flat. They appeal to outdated incentives, they ignore the lived benefits of withdrawal. You cannot convince someone to give up peace without offering something better. So far, nothing better has been presented. Men also recognize that not every problem requires confrontation. Some problems resolve themselves when participation ends. Walking away is sometimes the most effective form of boundary setting. It communicates without conflict. As this understanding spreads, the movement becomes self sustaining. Men support each other not through ideology, but through example. They see that life can be stable, fulfilling, and calm without constant negotiation. That realization is powerful, and the future of this shift depends not on men changing their minds, but on systems changing their structure. Balance cannot be demanded, it must be demonstrated. Until then, men will continue choosing paths that prioritize their well being. This is not a rejection of humanity, it is a return to self respect. Men are learning that protecting their peace is not weakness, it is wisdom. And wisdom, once earned, is rarely abandoned. As men settle into this new way of living, another realization begins to surface, one that is both subtle and powerful. Much of what they were told would bring fulfillment was never designed with their long term well being in mind. It was designed to keep them participating. Once participation stopped being automatic, the illusion weakened. Men began to see how often sacrifice was framed as virtue, while the benefits of that sacrifice flowed elsewhere. When virtue does not result in stability, it eventually loses its appeal. This clarity reshapes how men interpret past experiences. Situations that once felt confusing now make sense when viewed through the lens of incentives. Men recognize that many conflicts were not misunderstandings, but predictable outcomes of misaligned expectations. They stop blaming themselves for outcomes they could not control. This release of misplaced guilt is transformative. It restores confidence without arrogance and humility without self erasure. Men also begin to understand that boundaries are not something you negotiate endlessly. Boundaries are something you enforce quietly through action. Withdrawal is not passive, it is decisive. When men step back, they are not waiting to be convinced otherwise. They are observing whether circumstances improve without their constant effort. Often, they do not. Another important shift occurs in how men view time investment. In the past, time was treated as an infinite resource to be given freely in the hope of future returns. Men now treat time as their most valuable asset. They invest it deliberately, they protect it fiercely, they no longer gamble years of effort on uncertain outcomes. This alone changes everything. With time reclaimed, men rediscover patience. Not the patience of endurance, but the patience of selectivity. They are willing to wait for alignment rather than rush into compromise. This patience is mistaken by some as indifference. In reality, it reflects discernment. Men are no longer driven by urgency imposed from the outside. This discernment extends to communication. Men become more concise. They say less because they mean more. They stop over explaining. They stop seeking validation for their decisions. When communication is grounded in certainty, it becomes efficient. Silence, when chosen intentionally, becomes a form of strength rather than avoidance. Men also reassess how they handle conflict. Instead of engaging in endless debate, they evaluate whether the conflict itself is worth engaging. Many conclude that disengagement preserves more energy than resolution attempts that lead nowhere. This does not mean men avoid accountability. It means they choose environments where accountability exists on both sides. As men simplify, they notice how many social pressures were self reinforcing. Once they step outside those pressures, their influence diminishes. Expectations lose power when they are no longer internalized. Men learn that many rules only exist because people collectively agree to follow them. Agreement can be withdrawn. This withdrawal has a cascading effect on self image. Men stop defining themselves by roles assigned externally: provider, fixer, emotional anchor. These roles are not inherently negative, but they become burdensome when they are expected unconditionally. Men reclaim the right to define themselves on their own terms. As identity stabilizes, men experience a deeper sense of autonomy. Decisions feel lighter, choices feel intentional rather than reactive. This autonomy feeds confidence, not the loud confidence that seeks attention, but the quiet confidence that does not require affirmation. Men also become more attuned to their internal state. They notice when something feels off and address it early. They no longer ignore discomfort to keep others comfortable. This self awareness prevents long term resentment. It keeps emotional balance intact. Another consequence of walking away is improved decision making. When men are not under constant emotional pressure, their judgment sharpens, they assess situations more objectively. They are less likely to be manipulated by guilt or urgency. This clarity benefits every area of life. Men also recognize how much of their previous stress was anticipatory. They were not only dealing with present demands, but worrying about future expectations. Once those expectations are removed, mental space opens. Planning becomes strategic rather than defensive. This strategic mindset leads men to think about legacy differently. Legacy is no longer about appeasing others or meeting societal milestones. It becomes about building something durable for themselves: skills, knowledge, financial security, health. These foundations endure regardless of external validation. As men invest in these areas, they notice compounding effects. Small, consistent efforts yield significant returns over time. This reinforces the value of patience and discipline. Unlike social dynamics, these systems reward effort predictably. Men gravitate toward predictability. Predictability becomes a core value. Men choose routines that support stability. They limit variables that introduce chaos. This is not about control for its own sake, it is about sustainability. Chaos consumes energy, stability preserves it. Men also reevaluate companionship through this lens. Companionship is no longer about filling a void, it is about complementing an already stable life. Men are not seeking completion, they are seeking alignment. This shift changes everything. When alignment is absent, men are comfortable remaining alone. This comfort is often misunderstood. Solitude is not isolation when chosen, it is space. It allows reflection, it allows growth, it allows peace. Another overlooked outcome is how men walking away influence younger generations indirectly. Younger men observe older men who are calm, focused, and stable. They notice the difference. They ask questions. They learn without being told. This silent mentorship accelerates the shift. Men also begin to recognize the difference between needs and wants. Many things once framed as necessities reveal themselves as optional. This realization reduces pressure. Life becomes lighter. Decisions become simpler. As simplicity increases, satisfaction follows. Men discover that happiness does not require constant stimulation. It requires balance, enough challenge to grow, enough rest to recover, enough purpose to stay engaged, enough peace to remain grounded. This balance is fragile in chaotic environments. Walking away protects it. Men become guardians of their own equilibrium. They stop outsourcing responsibility for their well being. This self ownership is empowering. Men also reconsider how they engage with culture. They consume less noise. They limit exposure to narratives that provoke rather than inform. They choose content that supports growth rather than agitation. This selective engagement preserves mental clarity. As clarity improves, men become less reactive to criticism. They do not feel compelled to defend their choices to those who do not share their values. They understand that not everyone needs to agree. Approval is optional. This detachment from approval is one of the most liberating aspects of the shift. Men no longer feel responsible for managing others' perceptions. They focus on managing their own lives. This focus yields tangible results. Men walking away also redefine strength. Strength is no longer endurance of dysfunction, it is the courage to leave it. It is the discipline to build something better quietly. It is the restraint to avoid unnecessary conflict. This redefinition resonates because it aligns with lived experience. Men know what endurance without reward feels like. They also know what peace feels like once achieved. The contrast is undeniable. As time passes, men become less interested in proving points. They are more interested in living well. Arguments lose appeal. Results matter more. A calm life speaks louder than any debate. This is why the movement continues without coordination. It does not need leaders. It does not need slogans. It spreads through example. Men see what works and adopt it. The future trajectory is clear. More men will prioritize autonomy. More men will simplify. More men will walk away from dynamics that feel unbalanced. This is not driven by ideology, it is driven by experience. Men are not closing doors permanently, they are leaving them unlocked but unattended. If circumstances change, engagement remains possible. Until then, absence is the default. This default state of independence becomes normal. Men adjust, life stabilizes, peace deepens. At that point, returning to chaos would require more than promises, it would require proof. And proof, in the end, is what men trust most: observable reality over rhetoric, consistency over intention, outcomes over words. This is the principle guiding the movement. Men walking away are not lost, they are found. They have found themselves, they have found balance, they have found peace. And once found, these things are not easily surrendered. As this way of life becomes established, men begin to notice a deeper shift taking place beneath the surface. The constant internal negotiation that once dominated their thoughts fades away. Decisions no longer feel like moral puzzles or emotional gambles. They become practical choices guided by cause and effect. Men stop asking themselves how something should look to others and start asking whether it actually improves their lives. This shift alone changes how men move through the world. What surprises many men most is how quickly their internal state stabilizes once they remove persistent stressors. They realize how much of their previous anxiety was situational rather than personal. It was not who they were, but where they were placing themselves. When the environment changes, behavior follows. Men who were once labeled withdrawn or disengaged often become calm, focused, and decisive when given space to breathe. Men also begin to see how often their instincts were correct but overridden. They remember moments when something felt off early on, but they pushed forward out of obligation, optimism, or pressure. Walking away teaches men to trust those instincts again. When intuition aligns with outcome repeatedly, confidence grows naturally. This confidence is grounded, not performative. It does not seek attention or approval. It simply exists. As confidence stabilizes, men feel less compelled to justify themselves. They no longer feel the need to explain their choices to people who are not affected by them. This is not arrogance, it is clarity. Men understand that not every decision requires consensus. Many decisions only require self honesty. And this clarity also reshapes how men view sacrifice. Sacrifice is no longer automatic or assumed, it becomes conditional. Men ask what the sacrifice is for, who benefits, and whether the cost is justified. When answers are vague or one sided, sacrifice is withheld. This discernment prevents burnout and resentment. Another change occurs in how men handle expectations. In the past, expectations often felt infinite and unspoken. Men were expected to anticipate needs without clear communication. Now, men prioritize explicit agreements. If expectations are not stated clearly, they are not internalized. This reduces confusion and conflict dramatically. Men also become more comfortable with uncertainty. Instead of trying to control outcomes through overinvestment, they accept that not everything can be predicted. This acceptance reduces pressure. Men focus on what they can control and release the rest. This mindset leads to steadier progress. As emotional bandwidth increases, men rediscover creativity. Creative pursuits once abandoned due to exhaustion resurface. Writing, building, learning, experimenting. These activities provide intrinsic reward. They remind men that fulfillment can be generated internally rather than extracted from external dynamics. Men also notice how much of their previous effort went toward managing impressions. They were constantly calibrating behavior to avoid misinterpretation. Once disengaged, that mental load disappears. Authenticity becomes easier when there is no audience to appease. This authenticity strengthens self respect. Men align actions with values rather than expectations. When actions and values align, internal conflict diminishes. Peace follows naturally. Men walking away also develop a different relationship with ambition. Ambition becomes selective. They still pursue goals, but those goals are chosen intentionally. They are not chasing status for its own sake. They are building stability, competence, and independence. These goals compound quietly over time. This quiet compounding is powerful because it is sustainable. Men no longer burn themselves out chasing milestones that do not align with their priorities. Progress becomes steady rather than explosive. This steadiness creates confidence in the future. Men also reassess what they consider success socially. Success is no longer measured by how busy or stressed someone appears. It is measured by how controlled and balanced their life feels. Men admire calm competence more than loud performance. This shift influences how men interact with others. Conversations become more substantive. They are less interested in surface level validation and more interested in meaningful exchange. Relationships that survive this filter tend to be stronger and more honest. Men also become less reactive to provocation. When identity is stable, criticism loses its sting. Men no longer feel compelled to defend themselves against narratives that do not reflect their lived experience. Silence becomes an option rather than a weakness. Another important aspect is how men redefine loyalty. Loyalty is no longer blind or unconditional, it is reciprocal. Men remain loyal to people and environments that demonstrate consistency and respect. Loyalty without reciprocity is recognized as self neglect. This recognition leads men to value reliability above intensity. They choose people who are predictable rather than dramatic. This choice reduces emotional volatility and increases trust. As men build these quieter lives, they often find that their overall satisfaction increases even as their visibility decreases. They are less present in public debates and more present in their own lives. This trade off feels worthwhile. Men also begin to see how many cultural pressures were fueled by comparison. Once they step out of comparison loops, contentment rises. Men stop measuring themselves against curated images or shifting standards. They measure progress against their own past. This internal benchmark is fairer and more motivating. Men see improvement where it matters. Skills sharpen, health improves, financial stability grows. These tangible gains reinforce confidence. Men also develop a stronger sense of patience with themselves. They allow growth to happen at a natural pace. They stop rushing outcomes. This patience reduces stress and improves decision making. Another benefit of walking away is increased emotional regulation. Without constant external triggers, men can process emotions more effectively. They respond rather than react. This regulation improves all interactions, even outside the original context of disengagement. Men also notice how much energy they previously spent trying to fix things beyond their control. Walking away teaches discernment. Not every problem is yours to solve. This realization frees mental resources. As men continue on this path, they often feel more grounded in the present moment. They are not constantly anticipating conflict or managing expectations. This presence enhances enjoyment of simple experiences. A quiet morning, a productive afternoon, an uninterrupted evening. These simple moments accumulate into a satisfying life. Men realize that happiness is not found in grand gestures or constant excitement, it is found in stability and peace. This realization changes how men view future relationships. They are no longer willing to trade peace for potential. Any future connection must add value rather than subtract it. This standard protects what they have built. Men also become more honest with themselves about compatibility. They no longer force connections that require constant compromise. They accept that alignment is rare and worth waiting for. This willingness to wait is often misunderstood as withdrawal. In reality, it is discernment. Men are not closed off, they are selective. As selectivity becomes normalized, men feel less pressure to conform. They accept that their path may look different from societal expectations. This acceptance brings freedom. Men walking away also tend to develop stronger internal discipline. With fewer external demands, self regulation becomes essential. Men structure their days intentionally. This structure supports productivity and well being. Over time, discipline replaces motivation. Men do not rely on fleeting emotional states to drive action, they rely on routine. This reliability strengthens confidence. Men also gain perspective on past struggles. What once felt overwhelming now appears instructive. They recognize how adversity shaped discernment. Gratitude replaces bitterness. This perspective shift is important. It prevents resentment from taking root. Men who walk away with clarity rather than anger maintain emotional balance. They do not need to vilify anyone to justify their choices. As the movement continues, its quiet nature becomes its strength. There is nothing to oppose directly. Men are not asking for permission. They are not issuing demands. They are simply living differently. This quiet confidence is unsettling to those who expect engagement, but it is also instructive. It shows that participation must be mutually beneficial to be sustainable. Men walking away are not antisocial. They are pro stability. They are choosing environments that allow them to thrive rather than merely endure. As this becomes more common, cultural narratives will have to adjust. Systems that relied on silent compliance will face pressure to rebalance. Whether they do or not will determine future engagement. Men are not waiting impatiently for change. They are prepared to continue independently. This patience gives them leverage without confrontation. In the end, walking away is not about rejection, it is about alignment. Men align their lives with their values, their energy with their priorities, and their time with what matters most. This alignment creates peace. And peace, once experienced, becomes the standard. Men will not willingly abandon it. As this journey reaches its conclusion, it becomes clear that what men are experiencing is not a momentary reaction, but a long term realignment. When men step back and take inventory of their lives, they often realize that much of their previous stress came from trying to meet expectations that were never clearly defined and rarely reciprocated. Once those expectations lose their authority, men feel lighter. They stop carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to begin with. This release does not make men disengaged from life, it makes them more present within it. Men begin to understand that peace is not something that you negotiate for endlessly. Peace is something you protect. It requires discernment, restraint, and sometimes distance. Walking away becomes less about avoidance and more about stewardship of one's own mental and emotional health. Men realize that protecting peace is not selfish, it is foundational. Without peace, nothing else functions properly. This understanding reshapes how men relate to the world around them. They no longer see themselves as obligated participants in every social expectation. They see themselves as autonomous individuals who choose where to invest attention and effort. This autonomy brings responsibility, but it is responsibility chosen freely rather than imposed. Chosen responsibility feels meaningful. Imposed obligation feels draining. Men also come to terms with the reality that not every environment is designed for mutual benefit. Some systems persist only because participation is assumed rather than earned. When men withdraw, they expose this truth. The discomfort that follows is not caused by absence itself, but by the dependency that absence reveals. Men walking away are not causing instability. They are revealing where stability never truly existed. Over time, men notice how their sense of self becomes more grounded. They are no longer pulled in multiple emotional directions. They are no longer reacting constantly. Their internal world becomes quieter. In that quiet, clarity emerges. Men begin to recognize what truly matters to them, separate from external narratives. This clarity guides decisions with precision. Men also begin to appreciate the power of neutrality. They are not required to take sides in every cultural debate. They do not need to defend or attack. Neutrality allows observation. Observation leads to understanding. Understanding informs better choices. This detachment from constant emotional engagement preserves energy. Another important realization is that walking away does not close doors permanently. It simply removes urgency. Men are no longer pressured to act quickly or prove themselves. They allow life to unfold at a measured pace. Opportunities that align will remain. Those that do not can pass without regret. Men also learn to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the absence of connection you desire. Solitude is the presence of space you choose. Many men discover that solitude is not only tolerable, but restorative. It allows recalibration, it allows growth, it allows peace to settle. As men settle into this state, they often become more selective with relationships of all kinds. They value honesty, consistency, and mutual respect. They are no longer interested in dynamics that rely on pressure or ambiguity. This selectivity does not reduce connection, it improves its quality. Men also gain a deeper appreciation for simplicity. Complexity once masqueraded as depth. Now, simplicity feels like truth, clear agreements, predictable routines, honest communication. These elements create stability. Stability creates freedom. Freedom in this context is not chaos, it is control over one's own life. Men regain control over their schedules, finances, and emotional bandwidth. This control does not make them rigid, it makes them resilient. Men also come to see that many cultural narratives thrive on tension. Conflict generates attention, drama sustains engagement. By stepping away, men starve these narratives of participation. This withdrawal is quiet, but it is powerful. It shifts incentives. As participation declines, systems that rely on pressure rather than value must adapt. Whether they do or not remains to be seen. Men are no longer invested in forcing change. They are content with personal alignment. This contentment is often misunderstood as apathy. In reality, it is discernment. Men still care deeply about their lives, their work, and their well being. They simply refuse to care indiscriminately. Men also learn that not every problem requires a solution. Some problems dissolve when engagement ends. Walking away is sometimes the most effective boundary. It communicates finality without hostility. As men build lives centered on stability, they often become examples rather than advocates. They do not need to convince others. Their calm speaks for itself. Th- This quiet example inspires curiosity in others without confrontation. Men also develop patience with societal change. They understand that systems move slowly. Rather than waiting for reform, they build parallel lives that function independently. This self reliance reduces frustration. Over time, men who walk away often experience a deeper sense of satisfaction, not excitement, but contentment, not intensity, but balance. This satisfaction is sustainable. It does not depend on constant stimulation or validation. Men also reflect on how far they have come. The confusion, stress, and pressure that once dominated their lives feel distant. They recognize growth not through comparison, but through contrast with their former selves. This reflection often brings gratitude, not for the struggle itself, but for the lessons it taught. Discernment is earned through experience. Men carry that wisdom forward. As this chapter closes, it is important to understand that walking away is not an end, it is a beginning defined by autonomy, clarity, and peace. Men are not disappearing from the world, they are repositioning themselves within it. The world will continue to change, pressures will rise and fall, narratives will shift. Men who have built stable foundations will weather these changes more effectively. They will not be pulled into every storm. In the end, the choice to walk away is deeply personal. It is not a statement meant to provoke, it is a decision meant to preserve. Preserve energy, preserve dignity, preserve peace. If you have made it this far, ask yourself an honest question. Does your current path bring clarity or confusion, stability or stress, peace or pressure? The answer to that question matters more than any external expectation. I want to know what you thought about everything we discussed in this video. Do you agree with it? Do you see it differently? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. These conversations matter and your perspective matters. Like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe and if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to men walking away and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.